Okay, it should be recording now. Adjusting my mic. Okay, let's get started. So the age of the Sentinel is here. First, we have really viable comps with all of, the Sentinels being played. We have double Sentinel being played here and there. Vice has been released, and now we have Chamber being changed kind of back to what he used to be. So what's going on? What are they thinking? Are we just getting the double Sentinel meta? Today's class is just going to be talking about what is going on with Chamber. We're going to be really focusing on the Chamber nerfs and the Chamber changes that make him the beast that he's going to be now. And I'm going to be talking a lot about the map placements you can use for his new anchor, and also kind of just show off a little bit of the things you can do with him. Okay, today's class is meant to be short and simple. We're going to talk about just the patch 9.05, and then we're just going to go off onto what this really means for ranked. Now, again, this is pretty much all we're going to be doing. Okay, pretty simple. Just sit tight. Let's just get right onto it. Again, big reminder, I'm taking in new students. If you kind of want to get coached by me, if you kind of want to talk to me more than just the once upon a time that I do the classes twice a week, then yeah, then you can just do that. Okay, I see most people improve between, 1 to 3 weeks. So hopefully we got that going. So the changes on this current patch that just happened are pretty simple. We got that range buff that we saw. The buff may seem insignificant, but it's actually pretty huge in terms of how it works with him and how much control you will have with the map. The next thing is something that I've been talking about a lot when I was talking about the ranked playlist, right? Like not playlist, tier list. We talked a little bit about Astra and how she's really strong utility-wise, and whenever you pick her, you're going to be okay, but she's still overshadowed by the other controllers, as other controllers can do the same thing she can do but better. She still has a lot of utility though, and that gives her options. However, the one thing that was missing is that extra star, and she got it back. So unfortunately, we might see a lot more Astra if you're someone that doesn't really like getting pulled or concussed by her, so she might see a little bit more play. One thing that I actually had a huge problem with when I was playing Reyna, or whenever I was playing with a Brim, is when the stim would come down, things would feel a lot more inconsistent. And now they're kind of addressing it by changing the way that the rate of fire affects your current spray. So stims are now more consistent. So for a lot of people that are having a hard time playing with maybe Reyna ult, and the reason they don't use it is because they struggle, I recommend that you now give it a try. If you're someone that just joined in, I recommend that you sort of mute up. We're going to get going with this. You'll get a chance to speak after all this is said and done. There is a question period at the end. Okay. And if you don't, I'll just do it for you, so no worries. Okay, and the last change was the Ares is a little bit more practical. I don't know if you guys have noticed, the Ares was changed and it was a lot more practical. It changed the eco meta, and now people were using it because it was better to fight it with it against rifles, and then it was kind of nerfed a little bit. So there's been a lot of things happening with a lot of the characters that we're seeing right now. So for example, Chamber was insane, changed the meta, was basically crippling Valorant for a point where just everybody had to play Chamber. Now he was nerfed. Astra, same thing. The only controller you had to pick was nerfed, and the Ares changed a lot of how people played the game for a little while and was nerfed. So you're going to see that a lot of these things are kind of reverting and trying to bring them back a little bit more. So the Ares is becoming a little bit more practical at this range. So when it comes to how you can fight people, it was really difficult at a range of 30 meters or less, and before you could only fight them at close range to kill them. Now it's more practical. Now you can use it a little bit more for range. It's going to feel a lot more consistent. And last but not least, you can crouch with it. Crouching was pretty bad. Now it's good. Okay, now you can use crouching to be a lot more consistent with your sprays. So that's pretty much the changes. We pretty much had characters that were really strong, and then they were weak, and now they're back to being strong. But Chamber is our focus for today. Let's talk a little bit about that. Before we even continue, I need you guys to understand what really changed before. So before, Chamber had one really good thing about him, and that's that he could exist in two places at once. He didn't have a lot of utility like the other Sentinels at the time, and the whole purpose of Chamber was that he was the utility. He was the whole point of making him go out there and get kills. Not only could you get information and hold space, but you could also get first bloods. You could also just do a lot of different things. And I say thought experiment simply because I need you to remember his range is not this big, but what you could do with him is be in two places at once. And his benefit, his prime benefit, is that he could just op and he could exist in 2 places at once, allowing him to not only exist there indefinitely, but also provide value by having this space. So if we remember from our last class, I talked about how this space right here is the contested space. If you have it, you know where the enemy is, and you can then make appropriate moves and rotations and maybe even see what's going on. That makes him a really good defender. Now, the changes that have now happened have made his range a little bit better because, again, the nerf kind of took off the second anchor, and now this is a thing. So does that mean that the anchor change was, not a big deal? Is it pointless? Not really. And hear me out for this one. So before, because of his change and the reason they took out his anchor, he no longer could exist in 2 places at once, making him feel like he was cornered every single time you picked him, and it felt like you had to really play a good game on chamber to feel like you were doing something. And this would mean that you were hitting all your headshots with Headhunter. It felt as though you were being very oppressive with your op, and it felt as though you had that space to work with simply because you were hitting your shots. But if you weren't hitting those shots, then your TP didn't matter and you were still at risk. So because of that inconsistency, you are only stuck into tiny particular areas that only fit you on that map. So Lotus was an example. On Seaside, you could use that if you wanted to. Same thing on this area by Haven, you could use that. But again, you were very restrained. You were very limited. So what do these changes do for you? Simple. Now that you are able to have that range, you're able to do the exact same thing that you could do before after the anchor, was nerfed. But at the same time, you're still able to do the same thing that you did when both anchors existed. It's a mix of both worlds where you're still not as oppressive as before, but the ingenuity of how you use the anchor allows you to be more efficient at holding more space. So for example, in this area right here, you're able to now hold 2 points at once, able to just hold this area indefinitely and able to hold this space just as much as possible. And by the way, goodbye, Tanner. Have a good one. Okay. So with this, right, you're able to hold this space. You're able to now just exist in this area without being contested, or if you are contested, you're able to leave, and by leaving, you're now able to exist in a new entire area. You're now able to hold A or B depending on what you're trying to do, and it depends on how genius your idea is depending on what you're trying to do with the anchor. You can see that you're able to play with somebody on B, and now you're able to kind of help them reinforce B side. If you don't want to lose it, you can do other things with the anchor that I'm going to show, right? But now players that like to op can now rotate a lot faster. The anchor, it now allows them to just be in a lot of more places a lot faster. Okay, the range now allows you to exist a lot better, and now you can play off of utility a little bit better, as you're now able to kind of exist within the range of the TP and do things like this wacky thing where, oh, someone triggers it, now I can go on B and help out the B player, right? But again, it seems very limited by now, right? Like, you're like, oh, you can just go from one point to the next. This doesn't seem like a lot. Well, how about this? What if you put an anchor right here? You're now able to push all of this area and exist in this area by grass, and you're able to also use that to defend anybody coming in from window. That anchor is that long in terms of range. Okay, maybe you're not convinced. Maybe you're not convinced that he's changed. What about other things? Okay, depending on the anchor position, now you're able to do a lot more with it just because of the range. Before, chamber players try to cope with the fact that they could still kind of do what he could do previously, but without the benefits of existing in more space. Well, what about something like this? In maps like Ascent, he's able to put an anchor down in this area or this area back here, and he's able to just hold that line for as long as he needs to without having to worry about the concerns of being pushed, without having a safe space to retreat to. Now he's able to use this extended range to not only be able to use it to push into these corners and get off angles, but he's also able to use it to contest more space mid. He's also able to kind of rotate around and get more areas than just one, right? Like, he's able to do it all with one anchor while still remaining safe because he's able to go back to, a safe spot. He's able to do it putting anchors here. If you wanted to put an anchor back there, again, he can still exist in this area without having to worry and not feel limited by the range that once occurred. He is able to do what he used to do previously just because of that range. Okay, so he's going to feel a lot stronger. He's going to feel like he's everywhere at once, depending on how good the player is at getting those kills and feeling a lot more, oppressive with how good his anchors are. But again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Okay, Ascent is really easy to identify. What about other maps? Okay, Icebox, as you can see, you can put an anchor over here by the stairs, and now you can exist in this top area. No longer do you just have to TP down below and, exist that way. If you're good at jumping up here, you're going to be able to, take this space by the top of this billboard, and now you're able to take all of this area. So now you have big screen. Now you can take control of anybody that's kind of pushing you and retreat all the way over to CT and spawn. Or you can now use this to, play like normal chambers do. Play with your op, hold this long space, and still able to retreat safely. There's a lot of different places for you to place this anchor, but this is just one of those examples of how you can easily play multiple angles at once with a single anchor. And that's the option that Chamber is able to provide now. Okay, what about something like Bind? You can now use this anchor and push up B. No concerns, no problems. You can now exist and be oppressive in that space. Let's say they're on eco, not a problem. No, you can push up and get that space and get out quickly. You're now able to control that space without having to rely on a lot of utility. Before, your trip was very limiting as well with how far you could be from it. Well, now you can be that trip yourself, and now you can take that space. Keep in mind though, plays like this where you have to hold space or you have to push up do require some mechanics. So, keep that in mind. What about maps like Lotus? You're now able to kind of choose your anchor and kind of play around what you want to do with it. For example, you can use this anchor in the middle. Now you can play for both B and A and switch back and forth while still remaining, to keep the anchor. Because again, the second you pick up the anchor, it is now on cooldown. The second you TP, it is now on cooldown. So taking that back ruins not only your ability to stay oppressive and stay, fighting an angle, but you can also keep yourself, on the move and still, remain in the fight. So now you can keep this anchor here, and now you can be in multiple places at once. You can use this anchor over here and now still be in 2 places at once. You can hold A, you can go all the way here and still hold towards A, right? You can keep one anchor and do all of it at once. What about Sunset? You can still do the same thing that perhaps other players were doing with, maybe something like Deadlock or Cypher. I still think those characters will still be picked in those maps, but like I said at the beginning, maybe Double Sentinel doesn't sound that bad. Now you can use something like Chamber and kind of pick the angle that you want without still being punished, because now you can play a little bit farther out. You can still play those angles. Haven, we talked about the anchor, but now notice how if we just put it in this corner, again, you still have the practicality of, oh, we're on A, we're rotating B. Now you can easily rotate over. We can put the anchor over there if you want, like we talked about. Maybe, for example, you want to use it as a way to kind of keep 3 angles at once. And depending on where you put your trip, depending on where your players need your trip, you can still remain in the fight without having to worry about cooldowns. This is actually something that's really nice. You don't have to keep picking up your anchor to kind of like remain viable. You can still remain viable without having to worry about that. You can still help your team, but again, you can do things like on Abyss. You can use this anchor right here. You can still play. This is a very popular spot on Abyss to hold back sight. You can use it to, for example, jump down, maybe to get the kill and then leave. Maybe you can use this to kind of play this off angle over here as players kind of push up and then go back. There's a lot of play. Okay, fine. Those are the maps. Those are some examples of some anchors you can use, right? What about other ones? What about the 2 maps that are returning? Simple. You put your thing over here by Heaven, and not only, and I know it doesn't look like that in this little graphic, but you can actually hold all the way over here, hold an entire angle over to players that are kind of peeking you, and you can just go back to safety, and now you can play from over here in Heaven. It is that powerful on a map like Pearl, and the reason I chose B, you can pick any other site, but the reason I chose B is because he's primarily one of those characters that love range, because his entire kit supports it, and he loves to op. So a map like this one and on a site like B, you're able to now use this to your advantage. You're able to move around, play under here, play under hell, you're able to kind of move around and still, again, remain consistent in the fight. You can also just use this on something like Split. We talked about his ability to be in multiple places at once. He can start on mid, figure out what's going on mid. Guys, I don't see anything mid. They're A. Boom, immediate rotation. Now he has a way to hold Heaven. Stuff like this is what made him really strong. And now it still requires a little bit of game sense, and he's not as broken as he used to be, but you're going to feel like he is everywhere against a good Chamber. Okay, I get it. He's good at defense. Okay, I get it. What about attack? It doesn't end there. He actually has so many options on attack, and 2 primary examples that I kind of want to show are something like Sunset and Bind. For example, on Bind, he's able to start, hold over here, and take control over, let's say, for example, on Showers. He's able to hold this angle right here. Maybe, for example, your team already has that post plant down, and now he can retreat over and start at a new angle. The ability to be able to change positions on the fly and still remain consistently, viable with your team, because you're no longer, waiting for your thing to come back. Maybe you're not like, for example, most people would TP and they'd be like back there, right? You can now trick your opponent. You can now stay more in the fight, and this allows you to kind of trick the opponent and still remain, again, on the fight. That's, again, a big portion of what he can do. What about, again, post plant scenarios? Let's say, for example, you're fighting someone here. You can swing them. You can go back, right? You can stay in the middle of this area. You can fight them. You're getting, maybe there's a lot of utility coming your way. Common chamber tactic is to just bait a lot of utility in and then TP out. Now you're able to swing out and deal with the opponent as you left for long. Maybe, for example, you're fighting them here and they expect you to be over here by long, or sorry, I should say alley in this position. And now you're playing short. Depending on what you like to play, depending on how you want to use your anchor, it can impact a lot of the rounds. And on attack, now we've seen that he's really valuable at playing post plant, and he's really good at changing positions in multiple fights, right? So, like I said, today was a quick class, but that doesn't change the fact that this is not an important thing to consider. He is going to be viable again. He's going to be really strong again. So, one of my final thoughts. In the previous tier list, I put him on D tier because it was really hard to combine with him. His mastery required good aim, and his anchor didn't really give him a lot to play with the team. It didn't really take much. The simple range change, his little buff, has put him back up there. Okay, there's some changes that we have to kind of put up here, right? Astra, like I said, was really good utility-wise, so that's the only reason I kept her up there. But in terms of like other controllers, we can see that she was overshadowed. But when it came to chamber, it really came down to that anchor. It really came down to how he could play around that space, because he was the utility, not the actual utility itself. And now that he can actually use that utility by existing, he's now up there. I think that that's pretty much how easy it was to change someone like Chamber. I don't think he's S tier yet. I haven't seen enough, but just based on the amount of positions you can pick from him and the amount of options that he can have, I think he's going to be a lot more powerful. Okay, this is pretty much it. We're going to close it here. Thank you guys for coming in. Thank you guys for watching. We're going to start a question period in case you guys want to ask more questions. Okay, maybe there's more to it that I need to kind of cover, and maybe there's another thing that I need to do when it comes to Chamber, maybe its own guide now that he is a little stronger. Thank you guys for watching. Let's close it up here.